In my past videos, I have often spoken about the strange alliance between the left and Islam. On paper, it should not make any sense, but here we are. When it came to the right, however, I think most people could generally identify a clearer line, a recognition that radical Islam is a threat, that Iran isn't just misunderstood, and that appeasement rarely ends well. But lately, something's changed. A new kind of right-wing voice has emerged. From Tucker Carlson, Candace Owens to Dave Smith, some of the same people who once condemned the naivety of the left are now echoing it. Part of the problem is they seem almost deliberately oblivious to the history of Islamic hostility toward the West, a history that predates Iraq, Afghanistan, or anything George W. Bush ever did. From the Barbary pirates to 9/11 to Iran's obsession with apocalypse and martyrdom, the threat was never only about borders or oil, it was ideological. But that's exactly what many on the right seemingly fail to understand. To them, the idea that someone might actually believe in holy war and act on it sounds absurd, especially when it comes to Islam.
There's something that people don't seem to understand about. We struggle in the West. I really do think we all struggle in the West to understand the fundamentalist mindset.
Many have obviously defined this side of the right as the woke right. Now, there's a lot of denial around such a segment even existing, but once you zoom out and see the patterns, the label starts to make uncomfortable sense. These are figures who posture as anti-establishment, anti-war, and pro-truth, but who increasingly sound like they're reading from press releases drafted in Tehran or Moscow. They'll tell you Iran is just a misunderstood nation reacting to decades of US bullying, that Hamas is fighting colonialism, that Ukraine isn't worth defending because Zelensky wears a hoodie and once got invited to the Grammys. But here's the twist. Many of these narratives aren't just born out of ignorance or ideological drift. They're also ironically being manufactured and amplified by foreign-funded disinformation campaigns. A recent New York Post report confirmed that Russia and Iran are running troll farms, specifically targeting MAGA spaces, pushing false flag theories, anti-Ukraine sentiment, and sowing distrust in Western institutions, all under the guise of America First populism. I mean, take a look at this account, for example, on X, or how the Hodge twins post on two different platforms. Kremlin-linked operatives have even been caught flooding social platforms with content defending Iran's regime, undermining support for Israel, and framing every foreign policy challenge as a CIA plot. The goal? Simple. Confuse the public, divide the right, and make authoritarian regimes look like victims. And if you think that sounds far-fetched, just remember, Russian state media literally orders its editors to play Tucker Carlson clips as much as possible. But today's video isn't about dissecting this side of the right. For me, it's far more important to simply show you that what many of them are saying is wrong. Let's start with Iran, because many of these pundits fundamentally misunderstand this country. In 1979, Iran underwent one of the most radical transformations of the modern era. It replaced a secular, pro-Western monarchy with something unprecedented, a fundamentalist Islamic theocracy. Instead of a political ideology infused with religion, it was a religious mission wrapped in political power. At the center of this was Ayatollah Khomeini, who created the doctrine of guardianship of the Islamic jurist. This was a religious mandate, a regime whose entire existence was to enforce divine law and spread an Islamic revolution worldwide. But it goes even deeper. Iran's leaders genuinely are currently awaiting the return of the Mahdi, a prophesied Islamic messiah expected to appear after global chaos to establish an eternal, perfect Islamic order. And believe me when I say, Muslims do take their religion very seriously. Khomeini took this idea one step further. Rather than passively waiting, he taught his followers to actively prepare the world for the Mahdi's return by spreading revolution, by confronting enemies like the US and Israel, and by provoking the kind of conflict that fulfills prophecy. In fact, former Iranian President Mahmoud Ahmadinejad famously spent millions building a highway specifically for the Mahdi, so that upon his reappearance, the Mahdi could travel straight from Tehran's airport directly to a sacred mosque without encountering traffic. This is not the behavior of a rational geopolitical actor. It's a regime guided by an apocalyptic vision. Now imagine what happens if this ideology, this obsession with martyrdom and apocalypse, ever gains the ultimate deterrent, a nuclear weapon. Iran's nuclear program is not new. For decades, Tehran has systematically concealed nuclear enrichment facilities from international inspectors. Sites like Natanz and Fordow were built underground and revealed only after whistleblower leaks. Despite signing the nuclear deal in 2015, Iran continued violating International Atomic Energy Agency rules. It enriched uranium far beyond peaceful needs, reaching 60% purity, just a short step from weapons grade, while blocking inspectors' access, disabling surveillance cameras, and sanitizing suspected nuclear sites. But why does this matter so much? Because Iran, on top of its own armies, manages a sophisticated, dangerous network of proxies. Hezbollah in Lebanon, Hamas in Gaza, and Houthis in Yemen, and militias across Iraq and Syria. Each of these groups acts as Iran's shadow army, conducting attacks that Tehran itself would rather not openly claim. If Iran acquires nuclear weapons, these proxies become instantly emboldened. Protected under a nuclear umbrella, they could escalate attacks against Israel, Gulf states, or even Western targets, knowing retaliation risks a nuclear escalation. It's no exaggeration to say a nuclear Iran means a Middle East more unstable, more violent, and far more dangerous than ever before. Now, some on the woke right inevitably say, but Israel has nukes too. Yes, it does. But here's the difference. Israel's nuclear doctrine is defensive, not messianic. It doesn't chant for anyone's annihilation, and it doesn't view nuclear war as a shortcut to salvation. Iran does. Israel's policy, often called nuclear ambiguity, is designed to deter existential threats, not to provoke them. It doesn't hand weapons to proxies. It doesn't test red lines to trigger divine intervention. And it certainly doesn't believe the end of the world would be a victory. Iran's regime, on the other hand, is built around the very opposite idea, that martyrdom is glorious, that chaos accelerates the return of the Mahdi, and that the West must fall for Islam to rise. It's a regime that made children walk through minefields and use the aftermath as propaganda. When people draw a moral equivalence between Israel and Iran, they miss the most important factor of all: intent. A nuclear weapon in the hands of a status quo power is a deterrent. A nuclear weapon in the hands of an apocalyptic regime is a threat, not just to the region, but to global stability. Which is why Donald Trump was absolutely correct in destroying these nuclear sites. As far back as 2011, Trump was already warning about Iran's nuclear ambitions. In fact, take a look at these.
I will stop Iran from getting nuclear weapons.
Believe me, Iran will never have a nuclear weapon, that I can tell you.
Most importantly, the United States and Israel can declare with one voice that Iran must never be allowed to possess a nuclear weapon. Never, ever. Reaffirm that Iran must never be allowed to obtain, under any circumstances, a nuclear weapon. In order to ensure, the other big move, the Iranian regime never obtains nuclear weapons. A regime with this track record must never be allowed to possess a nuclear weapon.
I know where you stand. The show's great. I watch it a lot. But you can't let Iran have a nuclear weapon. And you can't let certain other countries have nuclear weapons. Too devastating.
Iran can't have a nuclear weapon. Nuclear weapons are the greatest single threat to our country, but to the entire world.
Quick note, making videos like this, the kind the mainstream avoids and that platforms don't exactly promote, isn't always easy. So if you found this valuable, consider subscribing, liking the video, and supporting the channel on Patreon. It's what helps keep this work independent without ever softening the message. Now, Trump translated this stance into withdrawing the US from Obama's nuclear deal, reimposing crippling sanctions, and cutting off the billions Iran funneled into terrorism. In stark contrast, Barack Obama's policy was to engage Iran diplomatically. The JCPOA didn't just ease sanctions. It freed up over $100 billion in Iranian assets previously frozen abroad, including literal pallets of cash delivered straight to Tehran in 2016. Even Obama's advisor, Susan Rice, admitted openly that some of this money inevitably funded Iran's military proxies like Hezbollah, Hamas, the Houthis, and Shia militias across the Middle East. And this approach echoed Jimmy Carter's earlier era, where an attempt at diplomatic outreach resulted only in humiliation, hostages, and Iran's revolutionaries sensing weakness. The consistent lesson: appeasement has always emboldened Iran's regime. Strength has always contained it. And yet, despite all this, many on the so-called woke right still argue that Iran's hostility is purely reactionary, but that's a shallow reading of history. America's confrontation with Islamic extremism didn't begin with George W. Bush or even Jimmy Carter. It began before America was even a century old. In 1786, the United States was still a young and fragile nation. Its merchant ships were being raided, and American sailors were captured and sold into slavery by the Barbary pirates. These were North African corsairs who openly justified their actions through Islamic teachings. Thomas Jefferson, serving as US envoy, asked the ambassador from Tripoli a straightforward question: why were they attacking American ships? The United States had done nothing to provoke them. The ambassador's answer was blunt. It is written in the Quran that all nations who do not acknowledge Islam's authority are sinners. It is their right and duty to make war upon them wherever they can be found, and to make slaves of all they take as prisoners. This response revealed the truth. The issue was not politics or diplomacy. It was an ideological call to conquest. Jefferson realized appeasement would not work. So the United States built its navy, fought back in the Barbary Wars, and learned one of its earliest foreign policy lessons: strength deters, while weakness invites aggression. A founding father of the United States came face to face with the realities of Islam, a reality that America would face again in 2001 and change the entire world. That ideology is still alive. In the United Kingdom, authorities ignored widespread crimes committed by grooming gangs, often out of fear of appearing culturally insensitive. Meanwhile, Iranian agents have been caught plotting assassinations in both London and New York, including a plan to kill Donald Trump. In 2024, US prosecutors charged an IRGC operative who was directed to surveil Trump and prepare for his assassination in retaliation for the killing of Qasem Soleimani. Historically, this lesson has been learned over and over again. In the late 1930s, British Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain famously sought peace with Nazi Germany through appeasement, believing diplomacy could pacify Adolf Hitler. Churchill later summarized Chamberlain's strategy bitterly: an appeaser is one who feeds a crocodile, hoping it will eat him last. History proved Churchill right. Weakness invited aggression, and appeasement paved the road to the most devastating war in history. Today, the United States faces a similar choice with Iran and Islamist extremism: ignoring ideology, pretending the threat isn't real, or retreating into isolationism would repeat Chamberlain's tragic mistake, whether it be enemies in the Middle East, Asia, or Europe. Already, an Islamic fifth column is growing within the United States, just like many countries in Europe. Rejecting reckless interventionism is wise, but it cannot become willful blindness. Conservatives who rightly mock the left for their naivety about radical Islam cannot afford to now become equally naive. You need principled realism, a foreign policy clear-eyed enough to recognize threats, confident enough to set firm red lines, and strong enough to enforce them. Sometimes, the hardest choices do, in fact, require the strongest wills. Hey, you made it to the end. As always, don't forget to subscribe, turn on notifications, and give the video a thumbs up. It really helps. A massive thank you to all my channel members and Patreon supporters. You are the reason I can keep making content like this. If you want to support the channel, consider joining the crew. Just hit the join button below or head over to Patreon. Even a small pledge goes a long way, and I would genuinely love to have you on board. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.